Good afternoon. So very weird to be going live two times in one day. I'm so glad for those of you who are on so far. Thank you for being with us. I think Michael is not going to make it with us today. He may end up popping in. We'll just have to see when you actually work for a living. I'm just kidding. Poor Michael. He does have to juggle quite a bit of things. So he may or may not be on. We'll have to see. But I do know that we will be speaking with Representative Jay Steagall, who is in the waiting room right now. And so I'm going to bring him on so we can get started. Good morning. Good afternoon. See, I almost did it again. Good afternoon, Rep. Steagall. How are you?
Hi there. How are you today?
Well, I tried to psych you out and give you the wrong link.
Well, despite your best efforts, I found the right one.
Honestly, it was like that way this morning. I still am having problems with Rumble because there's something wrong with their scheduling it. And so I don't know if I did that accidentally or if the program did it. I'm not sure, but I'm so sorry. And I'm so glad you're here with us. So how did you like my card today? Gifting Oklahoma tax dollars.
Yeah, you misspelled grifting. But I like it.
I actually thought about that, though. I thought, do I want to do gifting or grifting?
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's I wish it weren't funny. I mean, I think we kind of laughed about that, but it's not sort of funny, is it?
No, not really. We're charged as a legislative body of being good stewards with the taxpayers' dollars. And of course, only collecting what it is that we need to run those core critical services that everyone keeps talking about. But anyway,
can I show you something?
I'm going to share my show. Yeah,
I will show you something. How about that? Okay, so you've probably seen this already today, so it's not like you're going to be going, "Oh, really? This one killed me." Have you seen that one today?
No, but I'll tell you, it's kind of been the topic all week at the Capitol. You know, how we can cut income tax, and of course, you know, I've got a bill that'll cut it and eliminate it over a period of time. I know Representative Mark LePack is running a bill that would do the same thing through different mechanisms. But you know, one of the top polling issues, and we'll keep coming back to this as we talk about tax dollars and why we collect them, how we collect them, and what they're collected for. But income tax itself is a violation of our state constitution, and there's been some debate about that, and even that at the Capitol, which tells you that, you know, maybe we should be better studies of the Constitution itself.
Wait, really?
It's pretty clear in Article 2, Section 2. And my argument has been that state income tax has been a violation of our state constitution ever since it's been introduced back in 1915. And just because we've been doing it for over 100 years doesn't mean that we've been doing it right.
Well, let me ask you this question because it bothers me. When I first started studying education, well over a decade ago, one of the things that I found in the Oklahoma State Constitution is the clause that talks about that we are to provide an education for the children of the school of the state of Oklahoma. However, it says up until the age of 16. So we don't do that either because there are kids well in school over 16. So I wonder, I think that's a frustration for a lot of us is the Constitution says some things we're really strict about, other things we just go, it's in there. What are you going to do about it? And I think if we don't start stressing that what laws are out there, we either have to follow or be repealed. And it's the same way with the Constitution. You know what I mean?
Well, I think first we need to understand that the Constitution itself is law, right? So that's something that we need to. That's a tough pill for some people to swallow. They look at it more as a document for guidance on how we conduct ourselves. Right, and that's not the case at all. It actually states that it is law. As a matter of fact, it is the people's direct law and charged to their form of government, including all of the elected officials. So, as an oath taker, and you know me, I mean, I'm wearing a piece of my retired military paraphernalia today. As an oath taker, I take the Constitution, both the U.S. and our state Constitution, very, very seriously, and the oath to support, obey, and defend both of those very, very seriously. No matter how we feel about provisions in the Constitutions themselves, if the people choose to change that document, then it is on them to change that. It is not up to us as legislators to change those documents, nor do we have the power to do that. With the exception of the state legislatures have the ability to ratify amendments made to the U.S. Constitution. But our state constitutions, of course, can only be changed through a vote of the people themselves. And thankfully, they're the only ones that are charged with that responsibility. Those are the people that I work for here in the state of Oklahoma. If the people want to change those things that are in our Constitution, they're going to have to take that up themselves. We talked about that actually the last time you and I were together, or one of the last few times in the discussion of property taxes, for example. So that's just another example. But what Article 2, Section 2 in our state Constitution actually says is somewhat more important than the constitutional argument itself. It is an acknowledgement of our inherent rights. And the difference between the argument of recognizing and upholding our inherent rights versus something that's constitutional is that sometimes our constitutions can get things wrong.
Yeah.
But what we first have to recognize is the inherent rights of the individual. And Article 2, Section 2 actually recognizes those inherent rights. And it states all persons have the inherent right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and the enjoyment of the gains of their own industry. And you've heard me make this argument before, but that little clause right there makes our state income taxes unconstitutional and furthermore, a violation of our inherent rights, which we are by the Constitution charged to protect.
Which, I've argued that includes property taxes. And
I would too.
Yeah, those are the gains of your industry. So if you don't mind, let's go back to this article just for a second, because I wanted to point out a couple of things that were said in this, because I read, kind of scanned. Republican leaders said that they're concerned about the timing of Stitt's proposed he's just proposed a 0.5% cut. Because they're afraid there are too many bills coming in, basically. They're arguing, I guess, Jay, they're arguing over how much it's going to cost, because apparently Stitt says $200 million, and then whatever the legislature has done, turns out to be like $600 million. So I don't know if you want to go into that necessarily, but I think the thing that is so frustrating to me is that you have, likewise, House Speaker Kyle Hilbert said he would like to do a tax cut, but the state must pass a responsible budget. House Minority Leader Cindy Munson, Oklahoma, said it was under Stitt's predecessor, former Governor Mary Fallin, that lawmakers had to raise tax to stabilize state coffers. I don't see, this is a quote, I don't see why we would want to take ourselves back to that position, especially when there are so many needs still for Oklahomans when it comes to education, our healthcare system, our roads, our bridges, and things that are so critical to just living life here in our state. Now, I was pretty frustrated about that line because I'm thinking about the things that government are bound to take care of, roads and bridges. In Oklahoma, education, not nationally, that's not something in our national constitution, but in our state constitution, it does say that we are required to provide an education. But healthcare system, I mean, my personal view is that we cut the budget. We don't just say, gosh, we don't have what there is to fund the budget right now. I mean, does that sound like something goofy or what?
No, Jenny, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here. What we have to remember is we have a record amount of money in what we call our state savings. And we can argue about, not you and I, but everyone can argue about what that cash on hand actually looks like, or what that savings itself actually looks like. But it's to the tune of billions of dollars. Let's just say it's somewhere between $3 and $5 billion, depending on who you ask. Just like the numbers that the governor's coming up with on what it would cost the state, or what the legislature says. To me, it doesn't really matter what that number really is, because it's not a cost to the state when we're sitting on a record amount of reserves, if you want to call them that. I call it an overabundance of taxpayer dollars. If we're sitting on that much in tax revenue and not putting it, and I'm not going to say this to give anybody an idea, we're not utilizing that money. We've tucked that away in the event of a rainy day, so to speak. But we've essentially collected too much in tax revenue, and it doesn't really matter where it came from. We need to be looking at tax cuts. So the natural place for me to look is, well, what's in line with our state constitution? Well, the elimination of the state income tax is where we need to be looking. Now, we can argue all day long about what it's actually going to cost the state. That argument is a red herring, and I'm not even going to entertain it. I mean, that's not a poke at you. That's a poke at everybody else.
No, I'm okay with it. I'm giving you a round of applause.
I thought you would like that. I don't entertain that conversation, but here's why. And it's really twofold. One, the first and foremost is the state constitution is a violation of our state constitution. The state income tax. Yes, let me say that right. The state income tax is a violation of our state constitution. That's number one. Number two is, if we actually understood anything about economics, and don't forget, my degree is in ag economics from Oklahoma State University. Go Pokes. If we actually understood anything about economics at all, then we would be good stewards of the philosophy of the velocity of money. What does that actually mean? And so what would happen if we reduced income taxes? Well, what we've seen historically over our state history is anytime that we've reduced taxes, generally we see an increase in collections and overall collections from tax revenue. Okay.
You mean consumer tax revenue? Like you go to the grocery store, you go to whatever and buy a TV.
Right. So the state, anytime we've reduced taxes, generally speaking, we've seen an increase in the collections of the tax revenue that's generated by the consumers. So what that tells us is the more money that we free up in the market itself, the more people are going to spend, and the more they spend, the more times they're going to spend it, as long as that money remains free to move in the market itself. Taxes thwart economic growth. So while while we've got a bunch of legislators and they're all friends of mine, and I think they're trying to do good work, I think they're off the mark a little bit on some issues when they try to pick winners or losers in the form of either a specific industry itself or maybe a particular company, for example, and trying to pass legislation to incentivize them to come here. Instead, what we need to do is take care of our own and make sure that we're following the law in the Constitution itself by eliminating the state income tax. And then we'll be looking at other ways to reduce our overall tax burden to Oklahomans anyway, simply as a result of the money moving through a free market more often than it would should we stick to taking it out of people's paychecks.
Well, so let's do this. Let's have a short discussion on free market, because I think there are people, we've got a really nice audience for 1:00. I think people don't understand. They hear it, but they're like, well, yeah, I can go to the store whenever I want. They think it's like free market. That's not free market. So why don't we have a short discussion about what free market really is? And maybe that'll help people understand why I've been writing about the tax breaks in Oklahoma and why these are a problem.
Sure. So many of your viewers know, I'm in the firearms industry. So I have a small shop over in Yukon, and I generate tax revenue as a result of being in business. If the state were to come up with some sort of incentive to attract firearms companies to come to the state of Oklahoma, then it would be doing so off of my back and everyone else, all the other couple thousand federal firearms licensees in the state of Oklahoma that are generating tax revenue. They're taking our money and using it to entice our competitors to come here. Now, I've been asked this question by someone who used to work for the governor. He's not there anymore. But he asked me at SHOT Show a couple of years ago, when the governor was out there trying to recruit other firearms businesses to come to the state of Oklahoma. He said, well, Jay, are you afraid of competition? And I said, no, you got me all wrong. I love competition. I do better work than most of my competitors do. So I welcome competitors to come into this market space itself. What I'm not a fan of is you using the force of government to take my money to recruit that competition. That creates an unfair advantage at my expense. That is not free market. And we can't argue that it is. And we can't argue that either of us are, at that point, me or my competitor in that scenario, are actually operating in a free market, because it's not. One of us has the government under its thumb while the other is taking a benefit. And that is not free market.
But Jay, if we don't do this, we don't have an economic backbone in order to have our kids have some place to work. We don't want our kids going to other states when they graduate high school or college. We need to get these businesses to come here so these kids can stay in Oklahoma and work. What's the matter with you?
I know there must be a problem with me. And I'll tell you what the problem is. If that incentive program were to be in place and this company moves into the area that I operate in and offers their employees more money because they have tax incentives that allow them to offer better pay than I do, then the jobs that they promised to bring that pay better are done so at the taxpayer's expense. They haven't generated any more revenue. In most cases, have actually generated less because there's fewer collections on the backside. Whereas if they would have just left me alone, let me keep my own income and pass that along to either my employees or hire additional employees, then I actually would have created more jobs on my own without the assistance of government, without the assistance of taxpayer dollars, and would have contributed more to my local economy than this incentive program that helped my competitors come in. It just doesn't make sense.
I would stand up and give you a standing ovation, but it would look weird on the camera. So I'll just do another one of these. And allow me just 1 second to kind of, if you don't mind, to don't say toot my own horn, but I just want to bring this in. So this is the article that I just got published in the Federalist. Oklahoma Republicans are helping green energy cronies scam taxpayers out of billions. And I don't forget, I was a biologist. It's not the same as a mathematician. So I'm always willing to listen to criticism about my math skills. But I want to point out a couple of things. So if I would go to the Federalist and look this up, because as normal, you can see that I've, linked all of the things back. But I talk about Canoo in here and what happened with Canoo. But later on in the article, I start talking about the subsidies for wind. And a lot of people had said, oh, well, Jenny, I don't know what you're griping about, because Mary Fallon did away with the tax subsidies for wind in 2017. Well, no, because we can, I can show you that that's actually not the case. NextEra received $191 million in Oklahoma investment new jobs credit, which is we can put all of this up there, but it's a Department of Commerce program called the new jobs credits. So the state of Oklahoma has actually given $1.25 billion to NextEra in subsidies since 2013. So I went to the U.S. Bureau of Labor statistics, and I found out that basically we only have about 400 people at least reported to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We only have about 400 people who are employed in the wind industry in Oklahoma. Okay, so from 21 to 23, with $191 million in tax credits, Oklahoma paid about $382,000 per worker, which works out to be about 7 times more than the average Oklahoma wage, which is reported at a little over mid $50,000 range. Thoughts?
Yeah. So let's talk about how these things happen.
I also have our favorite thing up here, so that we can talk about this at some point too. The subsidy tracker.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like this. This is a really neat little tool. There's another link that I need to get to you. You may already have it. It's on the budget portal that the House puts out.
Oh, okay. And I think I can find it while you talk.
Yeah, really, really neat. Great tool. I'm glad we put that together. Our finance staff has done a tremendous job of putting some essential numbers out there for those of us that are looking to, for those out there that are looking to see how we're spending money from an allocation or appropriations perspective. It doesn't show the individual receipts like the details you would see here, but you'd at least be able to see how the state legislature is appropriating your tax dollars. There you go. Yeah, really, really neat tool. And it goes back a few years. I don't know if they're planning on working backwards with the information that they
just
have available. Yeah, it just goes back a few years, but nonetheless, it's a pretty cool tool. So I read your article. I love it. I've coined this particular incident the conundrum.
I also wanted to point out something else too. So this is called the Oklahoma State Capitol. It's actually a Substack written by Jason Murphy. And he made the point in his last article that these were the sponsors for the Speaker's Ball. So the underwriting sponsors, look over here, NextEra Energy.
Yeah, I would expect to see, I would actually expect to see most of the people on the screen there as sponsors for the Speaker's Ball. Most of those are involved in the legislative process or have lobbyists up there to some level. So anybody, any of these lobbyists or lobbying groups that are looking to get legislative through are probably going to throw some bucks at the parties as well. That's pretty standard.
True, but I do think though, when you're talking about some of these, like, I did not realize that the largest subsidy taker in all of Oklahoma, according to Subsidy Tracker, is, do you know who it is?
No, I didn't add it all up.
It's OG&E.
Oh, yeah.
And I was very distressed about that because to me, one of the points I made in that Federalist article is it's kind of like taxpayers getting soaked to pay for lobbyists to get more tax dollars.
Yeah. Do you remember a few years ago on the, what was that thing called? We voted on a bill right after the freeze. It was in 21. Remember we had like 10 days of sub-zero temperatures and
we lost the Southern power pool and yes.
Kind of the SPP directed Oklahoma to buy, or directed our energy partners here. I shouldn't say the state of Oklahoma, directed our energy partners here in the state of Oklahoma to buy natural gas because they believed that our reserves were too low to get us through the rest of that cold snap. And the legislature came up with a bill to do that and modeled it after some of what Florida has done in the past to recover cost to these electric or utility companies, I should say, after a hurricane, for example. There was some fear, and this isn't a defense, but this was part of the discussion. There was some fear that if these utility companies had to absorb 100% of that cost themselves, then their stock prices would have been driven so low that some out-of-state entity could have come in here and bought the companies themselves. But instead of allowing the free market system to work like it's supposed to, we decided to stick our nose in it as a legislative body. I did not, and I have friends that work for those companies, and I get their position on it. I didn't agree with it, and that's why I voted no on that bill. Because what the bill allowed these companies to do was charge an extra $15, $20 for the next 15, 20 years per meter. And here again, sticking it to the consumers when the consumers didn't really have a choice on this at all. They weren't called and asked, hey, do you think we need to buy more natural gas? And as a former aviator, I was always looking at the weather. I'm like, these guys should have seen this thing coming, should have had our reserves ready to go. I've got a 45 years background in oil and gas with my company down at Steagall Oil Company down in Chickasha. It didn't make any sense to me that we didn't have access or that our utility companies didn't have access to natural gas to run the furnaces like they thought they needed to. But anyway, that's what happened. But that's another example of government interfering in the free market system itself.
So let me put this up here just so that we can see it. I may have to enlarge it a little bit. So give me a second.
And to be fair, OG&E is not just, they don't run just cogen plants. They also run solar and wind as well, I believe. They've got investments in those other
there we go. We can see that a little better.
Mm-hmm.
Well, true, but I do want to point something out. So this is, check me if I'm wrong, but it looks like it's $1 billion, right? So almost $2 billion.
1.8. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then the next one is NextEra. And then I didn't even look up Alphabet Inc. Do you know what that is?
It's Google.
Oh, that's right. It's Google. Oh, shoot. That's right. I forgot. So, yeah. So we're giving Google almost $1 billion. Coke Industries. Why are we giving Coke Industries, who makes billions of dollars themselves, and then comes back and provides all kinds of grants and things and dart money, even in elections? Why are we why Boeing? Boeing can't take care of itself? Who is Quad Graphics?
Yeah, I don't know who Quad.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. But then we've got the top ones round out Valero Energy.
Yeah,
why are we giving a Venezuelan energy company, let's see, how much is that? 196,602,399 dollars. A Venezuelan energy company, then Phillips 66, and then Enel, which is an Italian company. So I would hope that people would be kind of mad about this. I mean, what do you think, Jay? Should people be mad about that?
Well, even if they're not mad, I think they need to be asking questions. Like, what is this for? What does this do? And sometimes simply asking a question can solve a problem. You don't always have to get upset about it, but I mean, there's certainly, a few $1 billion worth of reasons to be upset about where our tax dollars are going, especially in the context of, why am I having to pay income taxes as a state when you're giving it away to these other companies that have the ability to make a living on their own? Why does their success hinge on me paying my income taxes?
Because doesn't Boeing get federal subsidies too? So how much are we going to subsidize these companies? I mean, I'll just be flat honest, because I don't have to be as nice as you do, and I don't want to sometimes. This pisses me off. I mean, this makes me like super, super angry. And part of the reason why it makes me super, super angry is when you go back and you look at the fact that OG&E, for example, has gotten $1,841,000,000 from Oklahoma taxpayers, when then what they do is then they turn around and go to the Corporation Commission and then also say, we need another rate increase. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's not okay. I mean, it's a public utility, but then it's privately traded on the stock market, but then we're going to give them tax dollars. And then I also have to pay for my energy. Can somebody please explain that?
Yeah, I can't explain all of it away. I know our utilities here in Oklahoma are largely regulated, and that is a different business model compared to some other states where those utilities are unregulated. In the overall scheme of things, the Oklahoma energy itself is cheaper than everywhere else in the country. Most other places in the country, we're like either the cheapest or the second cheapest. And it's because of the way we regulate those utility companies. But we need to be taking a look at these other subsidies as well. If it's that cheap to produce, then why do we have to provide subsidies to this extent?
Well, and I think that's the reason why that whole article, why I put that article up at the beginning. I mean, if you've got the pro tem and the Speaker of the House saying, well, I just don't know how we're going to be able to afford that, that's just nonsense, because obviously we're giving tax dollars away, and that's not okay with me. And I don't think it's okay with a lot of the people that are watching. Again, huge audience. I can imagine it's not okay. Dorn has a question I want to bring up. Should large ranchers who have signed a 30+ year industrial lease paid with taxpayer subsidies with a green energy company still receive USDA agricultural farm subsidies? And I think that's a really good point that he's making, because there's also double dipping going on this. And I just read an article this morning, and I'm glad you said something about that, Dorn. It was in my inbox, and it was, there have been 3 or 5, I can't remember, it was an odd number though, I'm pretty sure, 3 or 5 lawsuits from the federal government that had been filed against people who fraudulently took COVID handouts. And they were in the millions of dollars that these people were taking, government handouts and then doing something else with them. And I think for those of us who actually, and you do it for sure, you have your own business. It's not a cheap thing to have your own business, is it?
No, it's very expensive. Very
expensive. I mean, people say, well, you have your own business. I'm like, oh, well, I don't have to turn on the electricity. I don't have to buy all the equipment. I don't have to buy all the stuff that it takes to run the equipment that I've got. Right. I mean, it's insulting, to hear these things. And I think it's so insulting for people who run businesses to look at stuff like this and think, Like I just put up the thing Dorn said a second ago when he was, he was going, I could use $50,000 to start I mean, but it's true.
Yeah.
Who gets to pick? And that was the other thing that frustrated me, is that when I went out to the Commerce Department or the Commerce Department website, and I actually looked at that, the way these subsidies are picked are done in an executive session. So you have no way of even knowing how much this company is going to get as a subsidy unless you go back to the Oklahoma Tax Commission and you sift through all of their payouts to go and see who's getting this money. And so not only is it being taken from us, but then on the other hand, we don't even know who's getting what.
Well, this would be a great question for the governor, since he's standing up this new Doge office under the umbrella of OMES, according to his executive order.
Yeah, because I feel like that's going to be great.
So Rick Rose is the director over at OMES, and Mr. Rose, I consider him a good friend. Our parents knew each other. Our dads knew each other when we were kids, and so we have some history together. He used to work in the speaker's office and was always very helpful to me. I think he's doing a good job of trying to clean things up over there at OMES for us. It's been very easy to work with, and he's made a few staff changes over there that have been very responsive to us. So I'm glad he's there. Outside of Rick's direction, if we were to take that and put it aside and just take a look at the monster that OMES is itself and what it has been historically in the last few years, the Doge office, in my opinion, has absolutely no place under that umbrella. And it's not because of the leadership or the director that we have over at OMES, but because we've now created a situation where it's like asking Colonel Sanders to babysit your chickens.
The fox is in the hen house.
That's right. I've said that a few times this week, including a legislative breakfast here in Yukon a few days ago. But so it might be in the paper already. But it's true. I think if the governor were serious about transparency in our expenditures, then we would see something along the lines of what the House has done with our budget portal and making that open and available for everyone to see. I would think that every department would also have something along those lines, so that we didn't have to go digging for everything through tax records after the fact. We'd be able to see that up front. We run into the same issue with trying to find state contracts or purchase orders, things like that. It's just an absolute nightmare to find out where the money's spent, and unfortunately, it's not just a problem for those in the public. It's a problem for those of us in the legislature as well. Sometimes we have agencies that don't feel like they need to provide those numbers to us in a timely manner. When we've got pertinent questions pertaining to bills that we're running, we're up against deadlines as well. Whereas if that information were readily available, maybe we wouldn't have to ask for it at all. Maybe we could just go get it ourselves, find the answers that we're looking for. And then if we had questions about the data that's being provided, we don't have, it won't take as much of somebody's time to answer that as it would, to go round all that information up in addition to answering questions. So anyway, I'm not the governor, but if I were, I wouldn't have put Doge under the OMES umbrella. As a matter of fact, I probably wouldn't have stood up a Doge office anyway. What I probably would have done is relied on two other resources that we already have. The first is the state auditor's office. Under Cindy Bird, there have been a ton of reports that, and Cindy's website's very easy to navigate. Anybody can go pull any kind of audit report that they've published, and they're very quick to respond with any kind of questions that we have about those as well. But there's all kinds of fraud, waste, and abuse identified in those audit reports. So we really don't need another office with additional personnel to look into things that we need to make more efficient. Really, what we need to do.
State auditor doesn't sound as cool as Doge.
Well, maybe we could get Cindy a hat that says Doge on it in addition to CAI. But But seriously, the state auditor is charged with already
For sure.
auditing the performance. I mean, it's not just an operating audit or financial audit. There's forensics audit, and several other types that they dive into as an office to help us identify what we're doing well and what we're not doing well as a governmental entity at every level, state, county, and municipality. She does a great job over there. She's got a great staff. They do really good work. But unfortunately, they're understaffed. And I know that she's been fighting for additional personnel for years, over the last 6 years since I've been there.
Well,
That's been one
additional
of the biggest.
budget.
Right, because she needs additional assistance.
Right.
The need for us to monitor how we're spending money is just a necessity, since we're handling taxpayer dollars. It's just, we have to have people to help us audit the books. It's just going to go hand in hand with collecting revenue to begin with. We just got to have it. When we're underfunded, then it costs us time and energy that we don't have, and it could take us away from things that we need to be focusing on. So if Cindy's team is in the middle of an audit and can't do an audit on another entity, then they continue to get away with fraud, waste, and abuse. Even if it's not malicious, they're continuing to go right on down the road. Where if we had the proper personnel, maybe we could stop some things in its tracks, instead of asking, well, why did you spend the money on this? And instead we could ask, you're not about to spend that money on this, are you? So anyway, it's just an ounce of prevention is always, worth the money.
Worth the pound of cure.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
So I wanted to throw this in just a second. Denise said NextEra may provide contracts to some local companies during construction. Where's the proof? But during the actual operation might employ maybe 1 to 2 long-term jobs. That's why I thought even the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Denise, I thought that number seemed a little bloated, because I was like 400. Once operational, the industrial solar complex near Enid is monitored remotely from Florida. That sounds kind of like the Canoo thing, where we had jobs that were supposed to be coming in, but they were actually in California and just remoting in.
Yeah, so let's talk about that right quick. I think we're bringing up a good point here. Yeah, Julia loves it when government gives my money to billionaires.
And there's Dorn's comment about, I want 50 grand. I want 50 grand too. I don't get paid for doing any of this. And Gracie said Quad Graphics is an American marketing solution company headquartered in Wisconsin. So that looks like we need a little bit more deeper. You want to dive into that, Gracie, and find out why the state of Oklahoma they're in the top 15 of tax incentives? That seems a little odd. Julia also says Americans work to earn enough to buy what we want, and work to earn enough to fund people to oppress us. Yeah, pretty much.
I heard a good argument from one of my colleagues in a discussion with some folks at the tax commission this week, or in a tax commission discussion. I won't throw the personnel over there under the bus. The discussion was why we need to continue collecting certain taxes. And what it boiled down to was, we need to continue collecting these taxes so that we can employ people to collect those taxes.
You did not know.
Right. That was, and my colleague pointed that out. He was asking someone if that was going to be their argument. And it wasn't someone at the tax commission. It had to do with taxes that we collected, but they were asking another colleague, if this is your argument, are you arguing that the only reason we need to continue collecting these taxes is so that we can pay someone to collect the taxes?
But in a way, it's kind of like what I said about NextEra and all the money we give them in tax subsidies, and like what I said about OG&E. I mean, for Pete's sakes, you give OG&E all of those tax subsidies, and then what happens is you're paying I'm paying OG&E, but I'm also paying taxes, but then I'm also paying for my actual. I mean, it's just. How many times can you end up paying one entity? It's just not okay.
Yeah. So
Becky says, is it a coincidence that there's a reluctance to adequately fund the agency intended as oversight? to the perpetual issue of misuse of government spending.
Becky,
This is the reason why she's Dr. Pelham right
yeah,
there.
don't try to bring common sense or point out the obvious. So, all right, please don't do that. So
I
let's
love
talk
our
about,
viewers. They're the best. Okay, so
yeah,
go
great
back to
community.
the Canoo thing.
Yeah, let's talk about the Canoo thing for a minute.
Yeah.
So how did we get into the conundrum to begin with? And really what it boiled down to was the ability for the governor to spend money out of what we call the governor's quick action closing fund, to get them here. And every year the legislature is quick to give the governor some cash to spend at his discretion, to incentivize companies to come to Oklahoma to conduct business. Well, what's interesting about the Canoo issue itself is that the state was on the hook, and the city of Oklahoma City as well put up some money. Both these governmental entities put money up for a company to come here who had yet to actually produce anything, hadn't delivered any product, come here with high hopes and dreams. And I'm reminded of a country song, something about free bubble up and rainbow stew or something. But anyway, you know, if I were given a few $1 million to start a pipe dream business, I could probably, you know, spend that money away just as good as the next person. Here's the thing. If we're going to have this discussion about closing deals, and which I'm not in favor of, if we're going to have a discussion about closing deals, then at least we need to have a discussion about closing great deals, because anyone can close a bad deal. And this was a bad deal. It wasn't a good deal. And the question really needs to be asked this way. If the Canoo deal was such a good deal, if moving Canoo here was going to be such a great deal, then would Gateway, the bank that the governor had, if it's such a good deal, and if it was only a few $1 million, would it have been worth Gateway providing the funding for that and making the interest off of the loan? Would that loan have gone through? If they filled out the credit app and asked for $1 million or $2 million, whatever it was, would they have been given that money? And if the answer is no, then why in the world are we even entertaining writing them a check out of the taxpayers' coffers that we've disguised as the governor's quick action closing fund? It doesn't make any sense at all. So let's continue down the conundrum trail. Last fall, the company Canoo asked several of its employees out of California to come to the state of Oklahoma. Reluctantly, there were several of them that did, just in time to meet the requirements under the Oklahoma City agreement to qualify for the incentives that Oklahoma City was going to write them a check for. Without that move, they wouldn't have qualified for those incentives. Well, at that point, I'm speculating here, but I think Canoo probably knew that they were done. They probably knew before the end of the fourth quarter that they were going to file for bankruptcy. So they did. They filed for bankruptcy later. You and I talked about, maybe talked about how many of these employees that moved out here were on work visas. And
I don't know. I never was able to find anything about. I just knew that they came from California. Mm-hmm. There was 124 or 45, something like that, over 100 of them.
So I asked for some of these numbers from our unemployment office at the state. And at the end of the third quarter, Canoo had 121 employees based on the records that we had here at the state. I don't have numbers on what we had during the fourth quarter, but we knew that some more employees had moved to Oklahoma during that time. In the third week of January, 71 of the Canoo employees had filed for unemployment benefits. The next week, which is more than half of the Canoo employees that we know about filed for unemployment. The following week, there were only 63. So it's starting to taper off. And then the following week, there were only 51. And what that tells us is that the unemployment benefits here in the state of Oklahoma for these employees that we're speculating here, probably making more than $100,000 a year, wasn't enough. That unemployment benefit wasn't enough to keep them here. So they probably moved back out of state. But I think what this does is it uncovers an issue where this entire project was funded by taxpayers to move a company here that had absolutely no business in business, didn't deliver any product at all, cost us millions of dollars, both as a city and a state. And then because they weren't viable and because they wouldn't have passed a credit check to receive that money from a private institution to begin with, their employees, some of their employees, about half of them, had to file for unemployment benefits, at least for some length of time. Tell me how this is a good deal. Yeah, well, I've got a plan to answer that question. Where's the accountability? So I've got a plan for that, and maybe we'll discuss that as we go through the budget process this year. Love to come back and tell you how I'm going to address that or what I'm proposing to address that. But there's absolutely no reason for things like this to happen.
Well, in my article at the Federalist, I basically said essentially what you said, because in order to write the article, I went back and I looked up Canoo. Canoo was never viable. I mean, not from the beginning. And the guy who ran it, the CEO, I think he spent $6 million on his airplane flying back and forth to this place and the other place and where and even investors were going, well, why am I spending $2 million on your airplane and I'm not seeing anything happening? So my beef was this. We have a commerce department. I've looked at the people who have their pictures on the Commerce Department website. They all look very nice. Like they're probably very nice people, but they're apparently stupid or they don't know how to research. Because if I can just go out and look at these things and you can see SEC filings, you can find all these things. It's not that hard. They would never have given money to this company because, Jay, you were right over the target. There was nothing viable about this company from the get-go. They knew they weren't going to be able, they didn't have the numbers to be able to get an actual business loan. So the best way to do was pull the wool over the eyes of the Oklahoma Commerce Department. But the whole story, again, makes my blood pressure go up because it's not okay. It's just not okay. And it's kind of like failing upwards. It's kind of like, well, this happened, but then nobody ever comes out and apologizes or says, oh gosh, we never should have done that or anything like that. And I think the funniest thing about the whole Canoo story, to be honest about it, the 3 vehicles that the state of Oklahoma actually purchased, they weren't even built in the state. They were built in a facility in Texas and then driven up here and then, sold to the state of Oklahoma. Hardly anybody's been able to use them because there aren't even any charging stations around where they were supposed to go to be able to be used. It's insulting. To me, I am insulted by the whole thing.
Sure. Well,
I want to slap people.
Let me ask you this, Jenny. When you go buy a car, when you go buy a car,
I don't.
Do you go buy a car from a startup company or do you go buy a car from one of the major manufacturers that's been around for a while? And here's why I ask, that something is going to happen to that car. You're going to need service. You're going to need some sort of maintenance on it later. Why in the world would you buy a car from an entity that you don't even know is going to survive over the next 2 or 3 years and have an issue getting parts for the car that you just bought? I mean, when we teach our kids about saving money for vehicles, we're like, hey, you're going to have oil changes. You're going to have to replace tires. You're going to have to, make sure that your air conditioner is working when it's supposed to. All this stuff that's just normal maintenance on a car. How do we do that with an electric car that, like you said, wasn't even manufactured here in the state of Oklahoma? But the bottom line is the company wasn't viable to begin with.
No. So, I mean, that was just, and then somebody at the Commerce Department made the comment that they were going to have to claw back. They didn't get all of this money. They only got so much money. Well, I can't figure out exactly how much money they have because I haven't gone into the tax records to go, and the tax records aren't easy. If you want to know the truth, they don't have a search box in it, so you can't actually search the Excel spreadsheet. You literally, I'm not kidding, if you haven't looked at it, you literally have to go and sort on either a name or an amount. So if you have the amount, then you can find it by sorting on the amount. If you have the name, you have to sort it on the name. But then if it's like a C name, right, Canoo, you have to scroll all the way down until you can find the name. So it's not like a 4-second, 4-minute, 4-hour deal to find the stuff. And I think that also includes transparency. So it's kind of like I look at what is going on in Oklahoma and what we've been talking about here and what I've been looking at and writing about with all of these tax credits is kind of like what Musk is doing with USAID now. I mean, you look at all of the stuff that's been coming out about what we were paying for, what our tax dollars were going for through that governmental organization, and people should be mad enough to burn things down. It's not right.
I would encourage them to ask questions first.
Instead of burning things down, I don't think there's a problem at this point. You just burn it down, start over.
Well, as we work through the budget process this year, I would expect questions like this to come in from our constituents and certainly your viewers. I always encourage people to reach out to the representatives and their senators and start asking these kinds of questions because they do need to be talked about during a budget process. And if we're serious about transparency, then we'll actually talk about it and hopefully come to an agreement on what it is that one is our responsibility to pay for as taxpayers. You know, let's have an agreement on what those critical services are that we need to be providing for Oklahomans, and then two, cut everything else. It's that.
So I think Dorn's right here. We have asked, and they smoke and mirror us.
Dorn, I don't know if people are as malicious as your statement would lead me to believe. I think most folks in the building really just don't know. But that budget process isn't really discussed out in the open as transparent as we might think it is. I think on the House side, we do a pretty good job of having budget meetings all the time. I can't speak to the Senate side. I don't know what they do. I know we put our numbers out there on what we're appropriating dollars for on the House side really, really well. We need to do more of that. But to rein in some of this other crazy spending, we need to dig into the other part of the other side of it that we're not seeing as a result of giving other governmental entities the ability to spend money without any accountability, including the governor's office. It's not his job. Constitutionally, the legislature is charged with appropriating tax dollars. What in the world are we doing giving him $20 to $30 million a year to spend as he pleases anyway? So, I mean,
with people to give away that can't even figure out how to read SEC records.
Whether they can or not, constitutionally, we've kind of shirked our responsibility. Yeah, but I don't disagree.
So here's another thing that I want to bring up. It's not just the tax incentives we have to talk about. It's the fact that we keep enlarging government to provide more stuff to people who don't want to provide it for themselves. And there was a huge, I don't know if you saw it over on the Senate side, Senator Dusty Devers had a bill that he put out. I personally think it was more of didn't probably write it like he meant it to come out. You know, all of us do that. We say things and we went, oops, that's not exactly what I meant to say. Oh, yeah. And so I think it was, I think his whole idea was to stop public schools from continuing to take tax dollars to grow the public school into a situation where it's now all things to all people. Well, I can go get my teeth done there. I can get psychological help. I can get this. I can get this. They want to make the school a one-stop shop for every parent. And that's not what a school is. I mean, so I think the other thing that we have to do is decide what is the core function of government. Do we even know at this point what the core function of government is? Because we've got people who will scream, well, that's my son has to have these things. My son, and I, it's so funny, Jay, because, obviously I'm a little older than you. And I remember back in the days in Oklahoma, because I'm a native Oklahoman, in Oklahoma, where we would go back to school in August, and literally you would sit there and sweat would just run would run down over your nose onto your paper. Oops, sorry. Because we didn't have air conditioning. I mean, I'm still here. Pretty much, I still keep in touch with people I went to high school with. Pretty much our whole class is still here. I mean, believe it or not, back in the day, we didn't have services in the school. The only thing I think I ever remember was at the beginning of every school year, you had to go into the nurse's office and they would give you an eye exam. But outside of that, you had no services. There were no services being provided by a public school. But yet now, if you suggest that to anybody, they shriek and have a fit and say, how can I do that on my own? Even though there are all kinds of nonprofits out there, there are all kinds of services that you can get ancillary to a public school. How can I provide that on my own? That's for you to do. How? I don't know. Maybe I should just stop there instead of continuing.
It's an interesting conversation. I would say the first place we need to look to discover what our critical services are is, what is it that the Constitution has mandated us to fund? And then everything else is debatable. But I think that's where we have to start.
So what isn't there? I mean, when you look at the Constitution of the United States, there are, and I forget, it's something like, is it 28 functions? Do you remember? People have actually pinned it down, and there are only supposed to be, what is it, like 17 or something functions that the federal government is supposed to have. They're not like provide for the common defense, right?
Okay, you're talking about the delegated powers to Congress that they can
Exactly.
legislate on. Yeah, so there's 17 delegated powers in Article 1, Section 8. And if you wanted to count the necessary and proper clause as the 18th, you can. So it's either 17 or 18, depending on which constitutional scholar you want to talk to on any particular day. I would argue that there's 17, and the 18th is the litmus test by which Congress has to utilize in order to pass the other any law pertaining to any of the other 17 powers that were delegated to them. But yeah, it's pretty limited. And then our state.
So how many over 17 do you think we are right now?
Geez. Well, we've gotten to the point where we've had to ask Elon Musk for help. So that's where we're at.
We're giggling, but it's not okay, because it's just not. Like you just said.
Right.
The Constitution defines what the federal powers are. It defines, and I'm kind of glad I got 17 in there somewhere. Defines what they are, but we don't seem to have that definition at the state level. Maybe that's what we need to do, is have some kind of an outside task force of volunteers who are willing to just go through and go, well, this, it says in the Constitution, we have to provide this we have to provide, or whatever. But we're providing so many things that my argument, and I think you would agree with me, hopefully 100% on this. I think at this point, the government is just enabling people not to do anything for themselves, but to rely on government.
It is the trend that we create as a result of having a robust economy. which creates additional funds. When we have additional funds that come into the coffers, the good idea fairies come out. And what we end up doing is bloating government as a result. And then the next year we have to justify.
Sorry, I'm stuck on good idea fairies.
But it's true. The next year we have to justify that budget again, or some nasty words get put out, such as we're going to have a budget shortfall. Why? Because we bloated government to the point to where we can't afford it anymore. That's not a budget shortfall. You overspent what you were supposed to last year. So you can't look at one blip on, in the checkbook and say, we're going to have a budget shortfall. Now the sky is falling. We have to do something drastic here, like raise taxes. Why? So I did. So back to the article, I haven't talked to Speaker Hilbert or Pro Tem Paxton about my tax cut. So I don't know how they really feel about either one of those. And to be fair, I'm not going to, I won't speak for them on that. I'll tell you, what my position on it is. Right. But with that said, I'm taking a look at, what was the budget the year that I was elected back in 2019? What did we appropriate compared to what we appropriated last year? So there's a 6-year span that I'm talking about. And it doesn't really matter what the exact numbers were. I'll tell you what the difference is adjusted for inflation. And it was an over 50% increase in spending between 2019 and 2024. No one can convince me that it costs an additional 50% more to run the state of Oklahoma's government than it did in 2019. It's just not there. And I'm talking about adjusting for inflation. I know things are more expensive. So we can take that argument off the table. We have grown government to the point now to where it may not be as sustainable as we think. What we need to do is cut the income taxes back, if not eliminate them altogether, shrink government as a result. And part of my philosophy on this is if we don't start making cuts, then as far as tax collections go, then we'll never make cuts on the expenditure side either. And government, name one time where government has made cuts on expenses proactively.
Well, right now.
And then said, oh, now we have an abundance of money.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's give this back. Even at the federal level, they can't say that. We're nearly $40 trillion in debt. We can't make enough cuts to make up for that. It's just, we're going to have to figure something else out to dig ourselves out of this hole. Anyway, it's an all hands on deck situation, but we can't continue to justify a bloated government through the collections of taxes, and then at the beginning of the next year saying, well, if we don't meet this same number, then the sky's falling. We've got this budget shortfall now, and we can't do that. That's just silly, and that becomes the excuse for why we won't cut taxes. It's silly. It doesn't make any sense.
Julie has a couple of comments here. Maybe if they had to go take the money from their neighbors personally, they'd rethink that. And I know how she meant it, and she meant it to be real. Yeah. But it's kind of funny when you read it. But the point of the matter is that the reason why governments bloat is because they propagandize themselves into believing that they're helping. Because don't forget, the best words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you. So they believe that they're helping, and they don't see the people who they're robbing to help the people that they feel like they need help. And I think what Julie, if you had to just go to somebody and go, give me your wallet, I'm going to take this out because your neighbor needs help, people would look at him and go, you do that again, and I'm going to punch you in the head. I mean, it for some reason, people just think, like you said a minute ago, well, then we just need to have more money. But they don't realize that what they're funding right now isn't a realistic level of funding in the first place. And then she also said this. She said, I have a list of departments to cut. Start with the agencies that run ads to spend more. And that is another good one, because we should start with the agencies that have lobbyists at the state capitol.
Yeah.
Let's see, Department of Transportation, Department. I mean, I can go look at the lobbyists, but yeah, it's absolutely insane. We should not, taxpayers should not pay to have their taxes pulled from them and spent on something else. That's just insanity.
It is.
Could China take over? I don't know. Who knows? I did want to make a point. Not like I haven't made a couple of points here, but I wanted to make a point. So I saw a Facebook post just recently. Woman she said, this is why what's going on at USAID is wrong. And she just pasted in this Facebook link. And so I went to the post, and it was a woman who was working. Now, hang on. Woman who was working in Africa. And she was, I think she was a PhD that was studying malaria in Africa. And they were getting their funding through USAID to do this. And she was saying, well, I'm going to have to leave, and, I don't have a job, but that's not even really the problem. The problem is that these people won't, I'm leaving them, and they're not going to be able to have this malaria research. Well, and this woman who had posted this was very upset about this. Well, how could we be doing this? So the thing that I think that we have lost focus on, because don't forget, Ronald Reagan was the one that said, our freedom is just a generation away from being lost. And I think part of that is because of the fact that the bigger government grows, the more this group of people now is used to being taken care of. So they expect this. And then the other generation comes in behind them and goes, well, we want all of this, but now we want this too. And so as it grows, our entitlement grows. And this woman who was the PhD studying malaria had this entitlement. The government is supposed to pay her to go to Africa to study malaria. Number one, malaria has been studied for eons. How much more studying of malaria do we need to have? That's just off the top of my head. But the second thing is, where have all our nonprofits gone? I mean, we have usurped, the government has usurped so many functions of the church. So, and if you're not religious, fine, then have usurped so many functions of nonprofit organizations who function because you say, oh, you know what, Jay, I really feel like these people who are studying malaria in Africa, I think they really need help. So here, I'll donate them 10 or 15 or $100. I took my own money and gave that to them, right?
Freely.
But when the government comes and takes the money from me and then gives it to somebody else, I can't even say, oh, wow, I gave that of my own volition. That was something that I did that helped me, that made me feel good, and that helped somebody else. Why? And I wonder this, and I'm curious to know what you think about this, but I've often wondered at the reason why churches and Christianity and religion in general are faltering all over the world, and certainly in America. And my belief is that we've just taken away from the church all of the church's functions and put them under the umbrella of the state and gone, well, here we'll make schools for the blind and the deaf. We'll make schools for kids. We'll make nursing homes for people. I mean, we've done all of these things, and now it's all expected. And what is there for the church to do? What's there for the nonprofit to do?
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point. And it was just a few years ago when we saw the federal government handing out all these economic incentive checks and rolling out all these different incentive programs. It might not surprise you, but we saw churches actively asking for this money. I mean, it is way worse than government taking responsibility that should be in the laps of the churches. It's the churches also actively seeking to shirk their own responsibility because they're afraid to ask their parishioners to contribute to the cause. They're
Unless they
afraid
want to
to
make a
talk.
bigger building.
Right. Yeah. Unless they want to build a bigger building. But in a lot of cases, churches are afraid to talk to their parishioners about tithing. I mean, there's a statistic out there. Less than 5% of the Christians that go to a church on a regular basis tithe biblically. Less than 5%. So, there's a reason for that. And you can talk to any pastor that's passionate about the teachings of tithing, and they'll all tell you, if I talk about tithing, I'm going to run away my parishioners. They're not going to come to church anymore. So, as a society, and that's indicative of our now entire society kind of feeling the way that, you're describing here. There's this sense of entitlement, and someone is going to take care of me. And all I have to do is go, clock in 8 to 5, and they're going to take my taxes and provide all these services for me. When those are things that I should be doing myself. Because on the flip side of it, you have people like you and me that don't want government to take care of me. I want you to stay out of my business. I can more than I'm more than able to take care of myself and provide the things that I need for me and my family. But I kind of need you to get out of my business and get out of my way and let me create my own wealth that I can pass down to my kids. I can't do that if I'm being taxed on the things that are mine. But anyway, I'm going to take your philosophy one step further here and say that not only can I not freely give through the tax system to someone that may be worthy of the contribution. There's two things here. One, there's this little pamphlet called "Not Yours to Give." You've probably read that before, but the
And
premise
linked
of
it
that takes me to my
articles. Yes.
But that takes me to my second point here is that if you and I don't pay our taxes with a smile on our face and say, I'm freely giving this, and I'm being facetious to an extent here, but if we don't pay our taxes so that government can give to these other things that we don't necessarily agree with, the things that we did not consent to them spending our money on, then they come take our things anyway. So here's the situation that we're in. So how do we fix that? And those are the things that we have to address. And that's what the DOJ at the federal level is hopefully addressing here. How do we cut all this back? Because this is a bunch of nonsense. It's what we should be doing at the state level, which is why I got involved to begin with. How do I keep more of what is mine? How do the people in District 43 keep more of what is theirs? How do the people in the state of Oklahoma keep more of what is theirs, as opposed to government telling me what my moral duties are? Yeah, just like Julia is saying there. I don't need government telling me what my moral duties are. Those decisions are mine and mine alone. It's my life, my liberties.
Well, and I think the worst part about it is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because another Facebook post I read the other day, somebody actually sent it to me, and it was about a man whining because his son had a I don't know, reading disability. I'm not really sure what it was. And he was complaining and carrying on about how this was back to Dusty Deaver's bill, that 1017. How dare you, take these things away from schools? And it frustrated me so badly, because if I were to go to that man and say, look, I'm really sorry that your kid has a reading disability, and, I'm all about, helping you, direct you to get help for that, but I'm not paying for that with my tax dollars. You're the parent. You have a responsibility to your child, and your responsibility is to go out and find somebody to help your child with that reading issue. And when you say that to people, they scream like their hair is on fire. They start writhing around. How dare you? You're a horrible person. Why you have to absolutely do this? The schools have to provide this. No, the schools do not have to provide that. And as I've said, this has only happened in the last 20 to 30 years that this stuff has been creeping in. And my compatriot, who is not on with us today, said it's on purpose for the ultimate goal of centralization. They don't want a million churches out there taking care of people. And I think that's the problem. They're trying to get us to understand centralized government. Well, the government will take care of all of this thing. But here, and you could almost, I'm sure, say this with me, but what the government gives you, the government can also take away from you. So they don't seem to understand that at some point the government gets you on their little udder, all the teats are filled up, and then they go, oops, well, sorry, or they say, now you have to do this, or now we're going to watch every movement that you make. I mean, nobody wants to think past the end of their nose, and they always love their little pocketbook and what they don't have to be responsible for anymore. And I'm sick of pussyfooting around it, and I'm sick of walking on eggshells. There's no way around it. You people are entitled. You feel entitled. You feel like you're supposed to be, the government is supposed to be responsible for all of these things, and it's not. You are. And I know it's difficult, but there are those of us out there that do that kind of thing, and we do it. My goodness, I can't even tell you. We have we adopted 2 children, and there were some significant issues that we had to deal with, and that all had to come out of our pocket. We didn't put the kids in school and then go, here, you take care of this for us. We went around and tried to find, people to take care of those things outside of school so that the kids could go to school and be there for what they were supposed to be there for, was for learning. So, and I'm not trying to drag you into my comments, because I know the school lobby and how unforgiving and ugly they are, and they love to dox people. And, if you even suggest that, the government shouldn't be providing these things. So I'm not trying to drag you into that, but that's just me. Somebody said, John said, there is the problem, personnel, and way too many, for it takes 4 times the employees now due to them being on their cell phones instead of working. Close. Yeah, pretty much. All workplaces and cars need to have cell phone blockers or they won't work. If you see a snake, just kill it. Don't appoint a committee on snakes. Ross Perot. Very good. I love that. So I don't know, that was just my little screed on that. But if that's the case, and government has grown well beyond the bounds of what government is supposed to do, its essential functions, how do we fix that?
Yeah, we just got to get back to the basics. And whether it's a step-by-step process and we just kind of take our time with it, as long as we're moving in that direction, or if we just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off, either way, the result is going to be the same. We need to figure out what the agreement is going to be and get there, some way, shape, form, or fashion. We can't continue on the trajectory that we're on. We have to change trajectories.
No, Michael will tell you over and over again, and we've just been talking about it recently, that this country is operating on a debt that's not sustainable. And when we say this country, I mean, the country will drag Oklahoma down with it. And the only way to get out from under any of that is to get out from under debt and to figure out exactly what the responsibilities of government are to people. Roads and bridges, right? I mean, that's an easy one right off the top. We pay county taxes, which come out of our property taxes, for fire and police and, that kind of thing. But as for healthcare, that's not a government responsibility. It's just not. We made it that, but that doesn't mean it is. It's not a core function of government.
Right.
So,
you know what? I actually pushed against that a few years ago when we were entertaining the state question that ultimately passed to put Medicaid expansion in our state constitution. So I spent a lot of time actually trying to head that off because I could read the tea leaves. I'm like, at some point this is going to become unsustainable, but this isn't our job. This is not what we do. So here's a neat little footnote on this part of the discussion. under the current construct that the state of Oklahoma agreed to with the feds, there's a 90-10 cost split where the feds are picking up 90% of the cost of this Medicaid expansion with free money, I guess. I think they've got access to some imaginary tax base that Oklahoma doesn't have access to.
What
Also
was
known as
that lady say? Well, Obama has all the money,
right,
remember?
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, she's right in a sense. The feds have the printing machines, and
Yeah.
that's really what we're talking about here. But now the feds are actually entertaining the idea of shifting that to a 60-40 split. And the state can't afford that. We can't afford that. Well, if we would have had this thing off years ago, like I suggested, then we wouldn't be having this discussion or having to figure out, what is it that we're going to do? Are we going to have to take this back to a vote of the people, or does this become part of our, critical our critical services that we're going to have to provide now as a result of the feds, like you said, taking us down a path that we've agreed to at one point and then shifting gears on us later? Why in the world would we ever put ourselves in that kind of position? It doesn't make financial sense. It's not good common sense. And I mean, I grew up on horseback, man. I've never hitched my horse to a wagon that I wasn't willing to pull the whole route. So why in the world would we do this? It defies all logic.
Do you think it's the chicken in every pot thing? It's the I really want to get elected. I mean, and I've met so many legislators over the years, and I've seen some of them who they really do go in with the greatest aspirations and the greatest well, they're trying to do the right thing, right? I mean, that's what they're trying to do. And then what ends up happening is, well, if I stay here, I need to stay here to get more done. So then if I'm going to stay here, I'm going to have to give somebody something in order to be able to get the vote so that I can stay. I mean, I kind of see this happening. I've seen it happen in different lawmakers that I've known over the years, where you just think, well, it wasn't about getting elected the first time. It was about fixing the problem. And now we're just worried about getting elected. So I don't know what the fix is. I just don't. I think the only fix is for people to get involved to the point that they know exactly who their representative is. They're letting their representative know exactly what they want, and they're making them accountable by saying, okay, look, if this isn't something that you're interested in, then we're not interested in having you represent us again next time.
Yeah. I've got a white paper coming out pretty soon. I'm going to get it over to you to proofread it before I publish it. But it actually defines what representing means. What does it mean to represent your constituents? Because as unpopular as it may come across, it does not mean doing the will of the people. That we do not live in a mob rule society.
Well, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that.
My job is not to do what the majority of my constituents want. My job is to do what I'm constitutionally charged to do, and that's to protect their individual rights. And that means all of them, not just some of them. So
That's
anyway,
a good point.
We'll come back to that maybe on another podcast where we can discuss that. Because it's very, very important for our viewers to understand, what does it mean? If I need to go find new representation for my district, what is it that I need to be looking for? What is it that I need to be looking for? And I'll tell you, when I had first considered running for office, I met with a good friend of mine. Julia was one of them, but another good friend of ours sat me down at coffee and he said, Jay, what is the purpose of government? And whether he was going to support me running for office from that point on was 100% based on how I answered that question. And if the people running for office don't know how to answer that question, then they don't need to be running for office. We need to go find somebody else, because you need to understand what that basic principle is to hold a seat as an elected official. But anyway, we'll talk about that when I get that paper ready. I'd love for you to read it and go over that for me. Maybe do some edits. Remember, I'm a pilot. I use small words, big print, lots of pictures.
I use lots of links and lots of words. So I don't know that I'm the best one for that. Well, give us, because we know that we have your bill out there and we know what the governor has said in this one instance, and we know what the legislative leaders are saying right now. What is your charge to us to make sure that we start dealing with that this session?
Well, there's actually a handful of things that we could discuss, but one, encourage the governor to stay on point with eliminating or reducing the income tax.
Okay.
His half and a plan means that he wants half a point reduction this year and a path to zero income tax, which is something that we've been arguing for years now. And I think the governor's on point with that. I don't think it's a political statement. I think he's serious about it. And I think we need to be seriously considering it.
Okay.
And then two, we need to be talking with our legislators and our senators over at the Capitol about how we can make this happen. Now, go in with a plan. And I would suggest anyone who wants to engage in this conversation with their elected officials, go in with something in hand to say, hey, we don't need this thing anymore. So here's how I can save the state $5 million or $10 million or $20 million, or whatever it is. Say, hey, we don't need this thing anymore. Let's cut this out of the budget.
So in other words, they just need to go to Subsidy Tracker, and
that's a good tool. And then start asking questions about other things that the legislators spend money on. Take a look at past performance in the legislature and ask questions like, hey, why did we grow this over here? Do we really need that many people? Or if we're increasing efficiency over in this agency, why is it that we haven't cut any personnel? What is it that's going on over here? Ask those kinds of questions and then have an answer. Always go in with an answer. Hey, if you're asking for something, be sure to provide some sort of solution. That's just a good idea overall anyway. But look for those inefficiencies. I believe that we've got a mechanism out there. I'll try to find it for you where the public can submit ideas to the House to look for cuts. It's another transparency tool that we stood up this year. It's a great idea. We love hearing from the public on where it is that we can save money or cut expenses. And it gives the public an opportunity to be involved with our budgetary processes. So anyway, that would be my suggestion. Make those phone calls, have a solution in hand, or at least a partial solution. You don't have to come up with a new tax structure or anything like that, but help us look for those inefficiencies and where to make those cuts.
Well, and we have a huge audience on X today. So I'm going to tell all of our huge X listeners, retweet this. You've watched it. We're fixing the end up for the day. So retweet it, get it out there. Let people know what's going on. I have really enjoyed the conversation. I mean, quite a bit. I think these are conversations, like you said earlier on, that we just need to be having, because I think we're so close to the generation of believing that government is supposed to be providing us our safety, our security, our health care, our education, our fill in the blank. And, we've got to start walking that back. And if people aren't going to get that idea themselves, then we need to start walking back these subsidies and keep giving more, allowing people to keep more money in their pocket. And then they can see that they can do these things themselves.
Sure. If we want to promote a free market in a free society, which is what we do as conservatives, then we have to look at ways to help foster that type of environment. And usually what that means for anybody listening is that government actually gets out of the way. So how do we do that? But anyway, there's my,
at least gets out of my pocketbook.
Right.
All right. Julia says, thank you, Representative Steagall. If only the majority had your mindset. Great show, Jenny. Excellent information and concepts. Well, thank you very much, Julia. We appreciate you. And we appreciate everybody who's watching today. Thank you so much. It's been again, I've enjoyed the discussion. I hope we can keep having these discussions, because I really enjoy talking with you and kind of fostering the idea of smaller government. And so thank you for that.
Thanks for having me on. Enjoyed it again.
It. All right, everybody. You have a great weekend. On the 4th next week, we will have just 2 podcasts, back to just 2 podcasts. We'll have Jason Murphy on the 12th, and we'll have Robert Keyes on the 14th to discuss his lawsuit. and kind of his headbutting with the Oklahoma Election Board. So please turn in for those. Have a great weekend, and we will see you again on Wednesday. Thanks so much for being here.